And so for the next couple of months, I sank into a pretty deep well of depression. I no longer wanted to have visits from friends. I stopped reading, stopped making plans. I instead filled my days by trying to set the world record for the number of Grey's Anatomy episodes watched consecutively. And I was angry. I remember, being told stories of cancer survivors who had gone on to do extraordinary things and feeling such rage at the idea that anything about what I was living could be useful, could be turned into anything other than what it was, which was a deep sense of isolation and a deep sense of fear about what was to come. I had no idea. And that's what made it especially challenging. The clinical trial that I enrolled in was a phase 2 clinical trial, meaning they not only didn't know if it was safe, but they had no idea if it was going to be effective.
Wow. Okay.
And it really required what I can only describe as a leap of faith to submit my body, to submit my family to what ended up being a harrowing and grueling experience. We had so many difficult conversations as a family, especially because the side effects of the clinical trial were so brutal that they became nearly lethal on a number of occasions. And I ended up spending about 4 out of the next 8 months in isolation in the hospital, warding off everything from septic shock to life-threatening infections and fevers. And that was the impossible Sophie's choice.
Yeah.
Is this going to kill me? Is this going to save me? But I would say things to my parents sometimes when I felt I was really in a low down place that, maybe I was better off stopping the clinical trial, doing some kind of Make-A-Wish bucket list trip to some tropical island and smoking pot and doing whatever else it was that I wanted to do. And more than anything, to really savor whatever time I had left with them, with my friends, with my loved ones, rather than, torturing myself with these treatments. But I had this amazing oncologist, the late Dr. James Holland, who, when I was at my most defeated place, began during his lunch hour coming to my hospital room with his paper bag of sandwiches and sitting by my bed and talking to me, not about my latest biopsy results or blood counts, but he would ask me what I majored in college, what my most daring dreams were, what I wanted to do after all of this was over. And it always confused me because I felt like he's this busy man, why is he doing this? And I realize now that he was reminding me of who I was outside of these hospital rooms and trying to keep that sense of hope alive for me.
Yeah.
I think the experience of confronting death strangely can have a clarifying effect. All the artifice gets stripped away. And for me, I felt myself rerouting my priorities. What had felt important even just a few months before no longer mattered. It didn't matter that I'd strived and strived and strived. It didn't matter that I had all of these ambitions or that I had been a hard worker. What mattered to me was simple. I wanted to spend as much time with my loved ones as I could. And I think what it did for me was that it released me from any sense of self-imposed or external expectation. For the first time in my life, I was free of expectation. For the first time in my life, my parents, were overjoyed and would pat me on the back if I managed to walk half a block to come home. That's how low the bar was set for me. And what surprised me is that I felt a real sense of liberation to do the things I wanted to do simply because they nourished me, because they felt life-giving, and not because they were the things I thought I should be doing. And so for the first time in my life, I began creating entirely for myself. I began keeping a journal that I used as a sort of reporter's notebook where I would, write about the different patients I was befriending. The guy down the hall who was trying to encourage everyone to mount a hunger strike because our meal trays kept arriving with the food still frozen. I wrote about the nurses and the gossip that I'd overhear by their station. I
The
wrote
real life
about
Grey's Anatomy plotline. I love it.
Exactly. I once asked a young resident if her life resembled the cast of Grey's Anatomy in any way, and she told me that everyone slept around just as much, but that everyone was also far less attractive, which was fun for me because I got to sort of project all sorts of steamy plot twists to everyone coming into my room. But I was doing things for the first time in my life without any sense of it leading to something, without worrying about productivity or output. That was something I also hadn't experienced probably from the time that I was like 4 or 5 years old, when I could make a big, glorious mess with finger paints and revel in the mess and not worry about if it was any good. And I think, shedding that pressure to do something well allowed me to play and to experiment with different forms in a way that I wouldn't have allowed myself. I wouldn't have allowed myself the time to just try things for the hell of trying them, to read things because they piqued my interest and I didn't know why. And I had never had that luxury of time, which is an irony because, of course, time felt more precious and fleeting than ever before. And in writing in that way, I wasn't concerned with writing well or beautifully or even grammatically. I was really interested in pushing myself to dig for the truth beneath the truth beneath the truth. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I wasn't trying to sound smarter than I was, to imitate anyone. I was just following the thread of curiosity wherever it led me. And so because I was so mired in uncertainty, I had no idea what the next couple of hours were going to bring, let alone the next day or the next week. And because initially that writing was just for myself, for the first time in my life, I felt like I had finally found my voice.